Today's episode is being shot at Palmer's Direct-to-You Market. You can see behind me the counter that they have for both fresh meat and fish. And they have been a wonderful supporter of the kidney community here in Rochester, both by hosting cooking classes and by supporting the National Kidney Foundation. And I really just want to point that out and thank them for their support. Today we're going to make hot sauce. And one of the problems with hot sauce is the amount of sodium that's in each one of those little bottles. So what we're going to do today is we're going to make hot sauce that doesn't have all that sodium but still has all that wonderful flavor. Hi, my name is John Vito and I am a dialysis patient. Prior to that, I was a cook and restaurant owner for 20 years. While being on dialysis, one of the things that I have learned is that nutrition plays a major role in our health and keeping ourselves healthy, us being dialysis patients. Our program is going to combine the information we learned from the nutritionists and the knowledge that I have from cooking and create recipes that are both tasteful and healthy and can keep us on a good path. This is Cooking for Your Kidneys, where we're going to talk about food, nutrition, and health. But remember, I'm not a doctor, and you need to talk to yours and your nutritionist about these particular recipes. We're going to make some hot sauce today. Hot sauce has 4 main ingredients in it. The first ingredient is our chilies. Those are the hot peppers, all different varieties. You can use whatever you like. These are just standard chilies. These are Fresnos, which are a little bit hotter at times. These are jalapenos. So we can do any combination of that. The hot sauces you're going to find in the stores will often have a mix of peppers, something that they've created that they've liked. So that's the first set. The second set of ingredients is the acids, and that's a very important one too. Here we have some apple cider vinegar, and this is a white wine vinegar. So I use either one of these two. The apple cider vinegar will give you a little bit of sweetness, and if you like that, you should definitely use it. Or at least to try it out a couple times, because it does add a nice little different flavor. Now, the third set of ingredients are what we call aromatics. That's things like onion, garlic. I use some carrots in mine, but you can really add anything you want in the vegetables or even the fruit category. But that's going to add a little boost of flavor to the peppers. And the fourth set of ingredients was really just one, is salt. It's that much a part of a hot sauce that they included in one of the groups. But that's the big problem for CKD patients. So what we're going to do today is we're going to make our own hot sauce. We're going to limit the amount of salt, and we're going to make it better for us in general. Okay, so what is salt? Salt is made up of 2 ingredients, sodium and chloride, and that's the traditional table salt. There are other varieties, including those that are in no salt type ingredients, but those are made with potassium chloride, and potassium is really bad for kidney patients. So we're not even going to use that or discuss it. We're going to use that standard table salt that you find. It's made up of sodium and chloride. Those are 2 of the main electrolytes in the body. And the body needs to balance those with some of the other electrolytes. So in each granule of salt, you're going to have about 39.3% sodium and 60.7% chloride. Even though it's a 1-for-1, the chloride's heavier, and that's kind of important, so you know. So in the 1 teaspoon of salt, which again, as you know, I just discussed the separation in the weights, you're going to get about 2,300 milligrams of salt. And that's about all you get for the day. And that's considering a normal, healthy person. For those of us with kidney disease, we generally try to limit it to 1,500 milligrams, which is about 3/4 of a teaspoon. Why don't we head upstairs and do some cooking? First thing we're going to do is we're going to take our vinegar and add it to the pot. It's the white wine vinegar we talked about. It's one I like. It doesn't add any of that sweetness that we talked about from the apple cider, but again, it really doesn't matter. So in this one, I'm going to add about 1 3/4 cups right to my pot. You can see I've already got it warmed up. From there, what we're going to do is add some of the garlic and some of the aromatics. And so what the idea here is, because you know, we're going to talk about how many peppers, but it's really about the ratio. And what you're trying to get here is all of your ingredients just covered by the acid, or in this case, the white wine vinegar. That way, it's not going to be too fluid, and it'll cook down a little bit, and you'll get that nice thickness that you require for a hot sauce. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to chop up some garlic. Remember, I'm a double tapper. Tap once, and then just kind of crush it again. You don't have to go too crazy, because what we're going to do towards the end is we're going to put it in a blender. So really, this is just to help distribute the flavors throughout the acid. Next, we need to juice 1 lime. Yes, I'm using my hands. I know sometimes people get a little worried about that, but it's going to be just fine because we're heating it up to almost a boil. Okay, so the next item I'm going to add is a carrot. And for this, what I'm going to do is just peel it and shred it. Same thing, it's going to end up in there, it's going to distribute its flavors throughout the acid, and what we'll do is just run it through that blender in the end. So I've got here is a box grater. Just giving a quick one right through. Whatever you have at home is fine, just try to get it up into small pieces. If you have to cut it up, that's fine too. Again, just make sure that it'll work in whatever type of blending device that you're going to use, whether it be food processor, a blender, or even an immersion blender. Okay, now we're going to move on to our peppers. Now here we're going to use about 18, 17 of these. Again, remember they're always different sizes, so you just want to make sure that everything in there is just barely covered and really tight, not a lot of room in there. So we're going to maybe use a jalapeno, we're going to use a couple of these, but a majority of them are going to be these Fresnos that we talked about. There's a lot of research and a lot of studies being done about the positive aspects of the hotness in peppers. And what that hotness is something called capsaicin. So this capsaicin creates the heat, and it also has some really positive health effects for all of your body. It doesn't necessarily do much for your kidney, but what happens for people with CKD is that their kidney function causes problems in the rest of their body, and this often helps with some of those, like swelling, pain relief. I mean, if you go back in history, they've been using this stuff as a medicinal element for centuries and centuries. I mean, much longer than that. But there's a discussion about where the heat is. Everybody talks about it. Oh, it's in this, it's in the seeds, it's not. So this is what I've learned. All of the heat is in that little part of the pepper that seems to reach down from the top and grab onto all the seeds. And it's all right in here. And sometimes it actually stretches down into, say, the ribs that you see in peppers. That's where the heat is. People talk about the seeds having the heat, but really that's just kind of the pepper part of the membrane that's grabbed onto there, and there's kind of leftovers from there. Eating the seeds is not going to hurt you, so we're going to just throw them right in there. But just want you to know, if you want a lot less hot sauce, but you want some of the flavors that you use, get rid of much of that as you can or as you want to. I'm going to throw it all in because that's what I like. I like it a little hotter. And again, the same thing. We don't necessarily have to chop this up too much, but we're going to give it a little bit of a, as much of a cut up as we can. So again, that's where the heat is. You can see it. It's all right through here. Any leftovers on that seed, there's that rib. We're going to throw that right in there, and that's going to really help out, boost up that flavor, okay? So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to cut up, about 18 or so, or 20 altogether. Throw them right into our acid and our aromatics. We're going to add a little bit of salt. I'm actually going to only add a 1/4 teaspoon of salt, and that's it. We're going to talk about some of the others and how much salt is in there, but that is barely any. And like I said, if anything, you just want to add some towards the end when you actually eat it. All right, there's the start of it. Let's just get some of these in to make some room. I'm going to lower this. So the idea here is we're going to try to almost bring this up to a boil. Then we're going to let it simmer for about 20 minutes to soften up those peppers and also to kind of force some of those flavors right into that vinegar. Here I'm using sea salt, the large chunks of salt. One of the reasons we do that, by the way, is because with those big bricks of salt, when you measure it out, there's a lot of air in there, which means you're technically using less salt. That's why they say the bigger the salt, the less you're using. If we were to put your standard table salt in there, it's really, really tiny, and if you pack all that into the same amount, there's no air, and you're going to get a significant more amounts of salt in your food. So when you're using salt in any recipe, try to use big chunks and measure it. So the same measurement will actually give you less sodium in your diet. All right, I'm just going to keep cutting these up. We're going to cook this down and see what happens. Sodium is one of the many electrolytes in our bodies. It is a combination of sodium and chloride, and the other two tend to be potassium and phosphorus. Our body's like a balance. So if there's too much sodium in your diet, what happens is it gets into your bloodstream, because that's where those electrolytes are, and the cells in your body want to balance out the concentration, so it moves water from the cells into the bloodstream where this sodium is. That'll run through your body and cycle out, And that's generally how it then rebalances it. But then you get thirsty, and that's what happens. So your body's thirsty because you've moved the water from your cells into your bloodstream, and then you've gotten rid of it. In a chronic kidney patient, we're not going to get rid of those fluids very easily. And as a matter of fact, in the first 4 stages, it's just going to be a really slow process, but you'll still get rid of it at some point. When you go on dialysis, you may not be getting rid of it at all. So what happens here is you get a buildup of fluid in your bloodstream, and then it starts to congregate around your organs, and you're carrying all this extra water weight, you get swollen, and it's a real problem until you go back to dialysis and have it removed. One of the problems, again, with sodium is when it removes all that water from your cells, it makes you thirsty, because the body wants to balance it out, so you drink more water, fine for a normal, healthy person. But for us kidney patients, it's a real problem. So what we try to do is we're trying to lower our sodium levels, and that's of course through salt, and that's what we're going to get to. Okay, so we're making our own hot sauce today, and one of the reasons is because of the amount of sodium you're going to find in your bottled standard hot sauces that you use. There's going to be a big range. 1 teaspoon is a serving size for each one of these items. This was something they came up with in the 70s and 80s. They did a couple of studies from the Department of Agriculture about how much you eat of each item, and they came up with these standardized serving sizes. So this one isn't bad, it's pretty low, but I never use a teaspoon of anything. That's a small amount. This one is a little sweeter, it's not very hot. This gets you up in the 4%, 5% range. And then you get up into these and it's about 8 or 9. And that's where you get into some problems, because these are really more popular. This isn't bad and popularity-wise, but again, the same idea, it's a teaspoon. We don't need a teaspoon. And so this one, like I said, has 4 and they get up to 8. But what really piqued my interest was when I got to this style of hot sauce. This one has 8% per teaspoon. That's a lot of sodium. And what caught my interest was this is a type we used to use in the restaurant to make chicken wings. And so I started doing the numbers and the math, and I went, okay, so how much did I use for a half a dozen wings? And I realized that it's more like 2 to 3 tablespoons of that hot sauce that you're going to use for a half a dozen wings. So what does that work out to be? 2 to 3 tablespoons. If we just took 2 and you ate 6 chicken wings in a sitting, and just the hot sauce, again, not the wing sauce, which is also made of butter or margarine and a few other ingredients, which bumps your sodium, and the chicken itself, is about 54%. So just think about that. 6 wings at a typical bar, you're consuming 54% of the sodium that you're allowed for a day. How much sodium are you allowed for a day, as we talked about earlier? An individual without health problems like we have, kidney disease or any of the others, has about 2,300 milligrams. That is 1 teaspoon of salt for the entire day, and that's it. That is what you got for the day. In a half a dozen wings, you're getting half of that just in that one sitting. If you have something like chronic kidney disease, or you have heart problems, or a whole host of other issues, they recommend 1,500 milligrams, which makes these numbers just jump off the charts. That's what's got me interested in making our own hot sauce and reducing the amount of sodium in the food that we intake. One of the little tricks people use in recipes, as we talked about earlier, is to use the larger sea salt type products. And what I have here is your standard table salt, this is kosher salt, and this is sea salt. And they're just different in size. And when you measure out a flat teaspoon of each, you're gonna end up with less sodium in the larger rocks, as we talked about, because of the space between there in each scoop, because the rocks do that. And this is a finer grind, and it just kind of fills it up, and you actually get more sodium. So I just wanted to point that out to you and show you why this particular recipe is gonna be good for you to have a jar at home, and it also enhances flavor. Remember that salt is used to enhance flavor in foods. And that's a problem for us, because we want to eat something, we want to have it taste good. And they recommend using spices and herbs to really up the flavor, or hot sauces. But again, then you run into the sodium problem. So that's why we're doing this today, and I hope you will enjoy the end product. Okay, so it's been 20 minutes. Actually, it's been a little longer, because what I've done is I've sauteed these or heated them up and softened them, and then I let it cool down, and that's pretty important. You know, you put hot items in either a blender or a food processor, you can have a little problem. So make sure you let that cool down. Today we're going to use the food processor, but you could certainly use a blender, an immersion blender, whatever you have at home. And we're going to just grind this up. That's going to end up to be our hot sauce. So let's start that. In this case, I'm going to do, I think, about half. I don't want to get it to be too messy. Certainly don't want to wear any. And that's happened before. Okay, so I start with a little pulse. You can see all the colors in there. And keep in mind that the color of the peppers you use is going to end up to be the color of your hot sauce. On occasion, I kind of mixed a lot of green and a lot of red, and you get a brown sauce. So just be concerned with that if you don't want to have a brown hot sauce. All right, so I pulsed it a little bit, and you can see on the sides big chunks, and you know it's not ready. So now we're going to just hold it down and kind of mix it up for a little while. At this point, you're really you're working on your own personal preference. If you want a smoother hot sauce, you want to run it for a while. If you don't mind chunks, same thing, you want to run it less. So just keep that in mind. I like to have it a little smoother, and I'll tell you why. Because afterwards, you have a choice. You can leave all the seeds in and any other chunks that we have, or you can strain it and get a very, very smooth sauce. Again, that's a personal preference and something you can do or not. I actually take about half and half, and that way I've got some with, and then I've got some smooth stuff too. And this is perfect hot sauce for making chicken wings at home. One of the things you probably think you shouldn't be eating as a CKD patient, but because we've already reduced so much of the sodium in the hot sauce, you can actually make your own wing sauce and bake your wings, which is much better than frying. And that might be an episode for another day. But as you can see, the hot sauce is getting nice and smooth, or smoother at least. I stop it every once in a while just to let things kind of calm down and get back in there. So I've done that much of it. It's looking pretty good. And I think what we can do is just add the rest. You should or could empty it if you needed to, but I think we've got just enough to make it work out. I've used an immersion blender and sometimes, and if you do that, make sure you use a very tall container and a thin one. And that way there's a lot of fluid in there and you can submerge it. That's the whole idea of these immersion blenders. If it's tilted or some of it's on the side and it's a flat, wide surface, so when you put it in there, it could splatter all over, hence wearing your hot sauce. Having a little bit of the smooth stuff already in there is going to help out, break up the rest of it. Okay, so this is about where I like mine. You could certainly keep grinding that up, get it even thinner, but again, keep in mind you're still going to have the seeds and they're not going to break down. That's why you can strain it if you like to. So here's our hot sauce. Pour a little bit out for you. You can take a quick look. You can see some of the green peppers that are in there, lots of the red, and that's perfect. So what we hope that you will have learned today is not only how to make hot sauce with less sodium, if not barely any, but also how to read your labels and get a better understanding of the amount of sodium and salt that's going into your diet. All the information from this episode and from all the others are available at cookingforyourkidneys.com. This is the third episode in our pilot series for cookingforyourkidneys.com. Following this, you'll see a link that directs you right to a survey to tell us what you thought about it, what we could do better, and what you might like to learn in future episodes. So that's what's in your salt. Let's try that again. You can find additional information about this recipe and more videos with different recipes on cookingforyourkidneys.com.